Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jessie Ilhart, and I'm the Executive Director of VOCEL, which stands for Viewing Our Children as Emerging Leaders. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to the second event in VOCEL's Power of Community campaign, The Power of Teachers. So with the Power of Community campaign, we're lifting up and celebrating the adults who make the most impact in young children's lives, including parents and caregivers, teachers, and school leaders. We're also highlighting the way that VOCEL centers that value of community in all of our work, helping adults learn from VOCEL's expertise and also from each other. And before co-founding VOCEL, I started my own professional career as an early childhood teacher. I taught preschool, specifically a class of bright, energetic 3-year-olds at Casa Central, which is an incredible social service agency that's here in Chicago. And my older son, James, is a preschool student this year at Suter Montessori Magnet School. So I'm thrilled to be talking about the power of teachers tonight. I want to thank all of our Power of Community sponsors, especially Lindy and Michael Kaiser, who are the presenting sponsors of the entire Power of Community campaign, and Mary and Paul Finnegan, who are the presenting sponsors of tonight's Power of Teachers event. Also, thank you to all of you for joining what I hope will be an inspiring and educational 45 minutes. I'm going to start by sharing a quick overview of VOCEL's core beliefs and our approach to supporting teachers, and then I'll bring in a panel of really incredible educators and experts to continue this conversation about the power of teachers. But first, to kick things off, I'd like to ask that you share in the chat to build some community among those of us who are here tonight. So I know with the time of day here, some of you might be multitasking while making dinner or picking up kids from school or whatever it might be. If you're able to access the chat, please go ahead and share where you're joining from, your name, and what impact a strong community has on you. So what difference does it make for you when you feel a sense of community? And this could be any of our attendees, our panelists, our VOCEL team who's here. Feel free to share in the chat box. And throughout the presentation tonight and during the panel, you can share any questions and comments in the chat box, whether it's questions about the content that we're talking about, questions about the work that VOCEL does, any reactions that you're having during the panel. We have members of our VOCEL team who are here ready to answer your questions in the chat box. And of course, if we have time, we'll be able to bring your questions to our panelists and have them answer live as well. So to begin, at VOCEL, we believe a few things that I want to tell you about. First, we believe that all children can thrive, but not all children are thriving in Chicago today. And it's said that in Chicago, no matter what social inequity you're tracking, there's really only one map. So the same families that are facing lack of access to healthcare or lack of jobs are also the same families who are bearing the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic and also facing inequitable access to early care and learning experiences during those really important first 5 years of life. And we know that those early years are the most important for brain development. So because of this inequitable access, 77% of children from low-income households are starting kindergarten behind. And in many cases, they're never catching up. Second, we know that thriving children need an ecosystem of extraordinary adults. So that's parents and caregivers, school leaders, and teachers. All of these adults can have a really massive impact on children's brain development. Their work actually shapes the architecture of a child's brain, shapes those neural connections, which in turn impacts how children learn in school and how they relate to others. So it's really not an overstatement to say that these folks in this ecosystem have a lifelong impact on children and thus on our society and on future generations. And third, we know that all adults can be extraordinary with the right knowledge, tools, and a community of support. So in large part, that's what we're going to discuss tonight. So teachers and the extraordinary impact that they have on kids. Just a moment ago, I mentioned that not all children are thriving in Chicago today. In large part, I think that's because our city doesn't offer equitable support for all parents, caregivers, and teachers throughout the city, and throughout various districts. So some neighborhoods might have loads of parent-toddler classes, lots of professional development resources for teachers, and others might not. And that's really crucial and problematic at a time that couldn't be more important for children's brain development. And so VOCEL's programs are really working to change that and providing knowledge, tools, and community to parents, educators, and school leaders across the city. So those three beliefs that we just talked through are the foundation of all of our programs. So our Child Parent Academy, empowered by VOCEL, those are our programs for parents and caregivers. The Building Early Learning Leaders program is our program for school leaders. And then the Early Educators for Thriving Children Fellowship for teachers. And tonight, we're going to be focused on that work with our early childhood teachers. So it's really hard to overstate the challenges that early childhood teachers have had to overcome during the pandemic. They have had to learn on the fly how to deliver meaningful instruction to really young kids, right? To 3 and 4-year-olds over Zoom calls, how to build deeper partnerships with families in a time when so many families and also teachers have felt really isolated. And so early childhood teachers, I think, have always been called on to play many roles, asked to be an educator, but also a social worker, a nurse, etc. And as young children have returned to classrooms in person, I think that has, never been more true. So VOCEL has really heard loud and clear from teachers in Chicago that they need what VOCEL excels at providing: a deeper understanding of childhood mental health best practices. They need space to think about how best practices apply in this new context, and they need a supportive community. And so that's why this fall, we've launched this fellowship, the Early Educators for Thriving Children, which has been made possible by a 3-year grant from A Better Chicago's Chicago Design Challenge. And to tell you a little bit about the fellowship and what it involves, the fellowship brings together early childhood teachers who are working in some of those communities that I discussed earlier, most impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it helps the teachers in this fellowship to translate their knowledge, their vision, their goals into action with the support of a VOCEL coach and a peer group of teachers who are ready to help one another and ultimately one another's students really thrive. So the fellowship will focus on 3 areas: social emotional learning, play-based learning, and mental health supports. And in the panel discussion tonight, we're going to dig a little deeper on what each of these mean and why they matter. So the Early Educators for Thriving Children Fellowship is actually kicking off this very week, and we're planning to reach 20 teachers this year and their 450 students. And at VOCEL, we also have our own teachers who work with young children and their parents through the VOCEL Child Parent Academy program. So different than a daily pre-K program, in the Child Parent Academy, VOCEL teachers and family support specialists meet with their parents and their children once a week in small groups. And first, the parents and children spend time together with teachers, where our teachers are modeling and demonstrating best practices with children. But we also have time for parents and caregivers to meet in community with one another without their children, where they can share their common challenges and find support as well. And then we extend that support to home with our teachers providing brain bags for families, which are filled with tools for at-home learning. And we shared a little bit more about the Child Parent Academy on last week's Power of Parents program, but this week, tonight, we're going to hear from one of VOCEL's teachers on the panel. So this is a great time for me to introduce you to the folks we have on our panel tonight. So I am thrilled to be joined by 4 amazing current and former educators. So we have Maritza Castillo, a teacher for VOCEL's Child Parent Academy. We have Sonya Wu, who is a pre-K teacher at Lewis School of Excellence. We have Rachel Mayo, who is the head teacher for the Early Childhood Child Parent Center at Herzl School of Excellence. And we have Anajah Roberts, who is a longtime Teach for America staff member and was recently announced as the interim co-executive director at Teach for America, Greater Chicago, Northwest Indiana. So I'd like to bring all of them on screen now, and we'll get started with the conversation. Great. So I want to mention before I ask our first question here that tonight's panel is especially significant because we're on the cusp of launching this Early Educators Fellowship that I mentioned earlier. So I know I personally will learn so much from the four of you tonight. So I want to be able to have this moment to learn from you all, to listen, to hear your insights, and think that we'll be able at VOCEL to turn that around and really apply it to our new work supporting teachers. And I hope for all of you who are attending that you're able to take away some nuggets and some insights that can apply to your work as well. So I want to start with you, Rachel. You were actually a teacher with VOCEL in our early days, but now as someone who supports and coaches all of the early childhood teachers at your school, I'm curious what you've observed or what you've heard from them about what the experience of teaching pre-K during the pandemic has been like. So what have been some of the challenges, or what have teachers also been able to accomplish in the face of those challenges?
Definitely. I think our teachers have seen both the challenges and the opportunities. I think from the very first days of the pandemic, our teachers have been on the front lines and being the core support system for our families as they navigated some of those challenges that you mentioned earlier, Jesse, around food insecurity, around housing insecurity, health access, all sorts of different challenges that existed before the pandemic, but were only amplified. And there's also been opportunities for our teachers to be truly innovative and truly resilient as they built the plane and flew the plane at the same time, so to say, as they navigated online learning. And what did it look like for young learners to have really truly meaningful learning experiences via Google Meet and via virtually? And that was a really great opportunity for our teachers to rise to the occasion, and they definitely did that.
That's great. And I'm curious, Sonya, you're a pre-K teacher yourself. I'm curious what you would add to what Rachel shared in particular about what it's been like teaching pre-K during the pandemic, what your experience has been.
Thank you, Jessie. I agree with Rachel, just like she said. We have come together to really work together as a team. There are many challenges that our families are facing, even today, that they still are, maybe lack of access, lack of healthcare. We are in the work of working together, collaborating with our teams, and really lean on those teamworks with the school and the community to really support the community and hear from them to see what are their needs, and based on that to really provide the support and the resources that are needed.
That's great. So Sonya, you mentioned that teamwork that you've seen. I'm curious to Sonya or Rachel, what have you seen teachers do to be able to meet these needs that are, like you said, Rachel, so amplified, like the family needs? What are some of the strategies or approaches that teachers have used to really expand their scope of work? Maybe we can start with you, Rachel, and then Sonya, if you have anything to add.
Absolutely. We've definitely looked to connect with community-based organizations like VOCEL. We have several families who are enrolled in the Child Parent Academy, and we really looked for support as we were trying to provide those wraparound services. And we know that wasn't a battle that we could take on alone, that we really needed to address this as an entire community. And so we really looked for that support.
Yes, some of the challenges we have for parents is the lack of maybe technology or the access or how to use Google Meet in the classroom. So having the support of maybe parent workshops, or we having teachers or staff that goes into the homes of the students to support them to get on to Google has been really good and really helpful. And teaching parents those skills that they need to support the students is also important.
That's great. I'm curious, also sticking Rachel with you and Sonya, curious what you've seen in terms of social emotional needs for young children, you know, not coming out of the pandemic, we're still in it, right? But what have you seen in terms of social emotional needs as well?
Absolutely. We have seen an increased need for social emotional learning. In past years, we would deal with some separation anxiety at the beginning of the year, but that's actually persisted. And now we're well into October, and we still have many, many students who are still struggling to separate from their caregivers. And we know that part of that is due to the impact of the pandemic and spending so much time with family members. And so we've really worked hard to intentionally integrate social emotional learning into every component of our day, and also support caregivers in supporting their students in separating and transitioning into the school day, because we know that this has been difficult for caregivers as well.
Right, sometimes that separation is harder for the parents and caregivers as well, or just as hard. Sonya, anything that you've seen in terms of that social emotional? Has it been different, harder, easier than past years? What have you seen?
Yeah, I also noticed that on top of separation anxiety, there's also social interactions among peers and also social interactions with the teachers and adults and staff in the classroom. Because of the pandemic, students have not had opportunity and chances like before to go out to places to play with, family members or cousins or play days. So coming back into the classroom, social interactions in terms of peer play, group play has been a little bit challenging because the lack of opportunities to practice those skills. And as research has shown that, students with greater social emotional skills, they're more likely to be happier, they're more likely to participate, they're more likely to be motivated to learn, and they're more likely to have a better outcome in terms of higher performance at school and also in life. So when we're talking about social emotional learning in early childhood, it is important that when students are mentally or mentally healthy, that also impacts their development and their learning and their growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, Maritza, to bring you in here because you're a teacher for the VOCEL program for our Child Parent Academy, which means that you work very closely with young children and their parents every week. And so I'm curious what you've heard from parents and caregivers during the pandemic about their experience, and then what you and VOCEL have been able to do to support them.
Yes, thank you. So, similar to what Rachel would hear with their families was, a lot of our families did have concerns of making sure that they had the supplies for their babies, like making sure they had the support that they needed, right? The engagement. They were very concerned about whether their children were going to lose out on the social engagement with other peers, and that's very important for them to learn so that when they get to kindergarten, they're ready and they can engage with sharing and taking turns and everything like that. So we were very aware of that. We listened to our families and said, although we're virtual, we're going to try our best to get our little ones to engage with each other. And we made it very important within our virtual classes that we always were trying to get our children to engage and saying, like, look at your peer, like look at your friend, they have the similar likes or dislikes, or you are you're virtually sharing with your friends here. Like, it was very important that we were giving them that connection of hearing those words, sharing, taking turns, and so that later on they wouldn't lose out on that. So that was more of what we did at VOCEL. The teachers, we were just trying to get them to engage virtually within their peers. Other things that we did, like everyone else, Rachel said, we did reach out to other organizations to make sure we can connect them with diaper banks, making sure that we can provide them with food banks if possible, like that. So that's what we heard from our families, and that's what VOCEL was trying to do to support them during the pandemic. Even now, we're still going through that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to hear all of you speak, Rachel, Sonya, and Maritza, all about the social emotional component is so much of this, right? And I'm curious, Anajah, to bring you in here, hearing teachers, the three, educators and former educators here, but also all the educators that you work with through Teach for America. So many people are prioritizing social skills in their classrooms. Parents are wanting to prioritize more at home. Seeing social emotional learning as foundational to all learning and school success. I'm curious if you can tell us what you've seen in terms of how social emotional learning has been or hasn't been prioritized by educators over the past couple of years, but also kind of historically.
I really appreciate that question, Jessie. I think, so first and foremost, I'm 100% thinking about the experience of our teachers and our students in the pandemic. And Maritza, I just love the idea that we're still in it, right? And so this is very active, which I think is an important thing to name. So social emotional learning very much feels right today like this buzzword, that whole child, SEL, but very much my understanding, right, is that our teachers of color have for a really long time understood the importance of social emotional learning and its intersection, frankly, with being culturally responsive, right? How do we take the whole child, both their personal context, but the socio and political context in which they're living and walking in the world, and how do we hold that as we educate them? And so the concept, while very popular now in education and really flaring for folks who are not in education as a part of the pandemic, has been whether before Castillo, coined the term, was a palpable set of ideas. And so I say that all to say, we know that it's not new, although it is new now in common language. But I would say in education, working at Teach for America, one thing I would say is true is that our early childhood educators really understood this far more than certainly us secondary folks did, right? And so somehow it was almost like social emotional learning was such a critical component of teaching in a classroom in an early childhood setting. And somehow that just kind of got left alone once they got to middle school, which as a former middle school teacher, they needed it and they still do. And so I said that all to say what's been cool to see is that this conversation has been had about what social emotional learning now looks like between our educators in early childhood and our 12th grade teachers. They're able to have a much more robust conversation about the power of social emotional learning and are able to kind of learn across the continuum about what that might look like. And it doesn't just stop at 12th grade. One of the cool things that Castle talks about is that social emotional learning is a lifelong journey. And so I would say it's been really interesting is not only are our teachers talking about it, as with their students, but they're thinking about what that means for themselves, right? To what extent do I model that? And in a world where we're in a pandemic and all of us are being our SEL is being challenged, it asks this new question about how am I showing up? What am I modeling for my students? How am I living in the world? And how am I fostering that with my kids? And so we've been able to wrap around not just students, but teachers who are very much experiencing lots of burnout, lots of stress, navigating home and school in ways that, again, have always existed, but are exacerbated in this time. And so it's so much more than a buzzword, but it's a real necessity that I think will continue. If we do it right, it will continue far beyond this moment.
Yeah, I'm so struck, Anajah, of what you shared about particularly this lifelong journey, right? And how teachers are grappling with that, thinking about it for themselves. And just the other night, I was talking with my husband about my son, and entering play situations, right? For a 4-year-old, interacting with peers and thinking about, gosh, it's hard sometimes as an adult to, enter a situation with strangers, right? So I think that's so important for us to remember and stay empathetic when working with young children, that this is something that adults are grappling with too, especially amidst the pandemic. And I'm curious to, hear from any of you, all of you, on this next question. It's really struck me tonight just how challenging and complex educators' jobs are, right? They've always been complex and challenging, but maybe now more than ever, where you're navigating Google Meets and, like Maritza said, trying to teach 3-year-olds to share over a Zoom screen, navigating food insecurity and supporting families. I'm curious what you think has been hardest about that experience for teachers, and what you think teachers need right now in order to help their students thrive, or just in order to be okay themselves. What's been hardest, and what do you think they need? Or in Sonya or Maritza's case, what do you need? And any of you can feel free to jump in first.
I think that teachers are feeling the weight and have been feeling the weight of this pandemic from the very beginning. And I think that self-care that you mentioned, Jesse, and also that communal care and that communal grace for teachers, as they've been, again, as I said earlier, truly on the front lines since the beginning, and particularly pre-K teachers in our city were consistently the first to go back into schools and the first to be on the front lines. And so I think that support for teachers around their mental health, around their well-being, and really putting that into action and thinking, how do we operationalize that? How do we make sure that that's true for every teacher in every school, will really be transformative in ensuring that teaching pre-K in a pandemic is sustainable.
I was on mute there for a second and didn't realize it. You brought up that communal care and communal grace. I wrote those phrases down. I think that there's something so important about that, right? That validation or that space from someone else to work through something. So thank you for sharing that. What else would other folks add about what's been hardest or what you think people need?
I can go. As teachers, I feel like we always try to do our best in getting to our connecting with our students, right? We want to be there and we want to support them the most that we can, and it's very hard to do it virtually, right? We cannot get that connection. But one thing that has stuck out to me, and I think has helped me through this whole process, is that we are showing up. We're there. Even though it is virtually and we cannot give them those hugs or those squeezes, or it's hard, but they're seeing us. They know that we'll be there for us every week, and that we're gonna interact with them virtually. So I think that giving ourselves that pat on the back, that saying, we're there, we're trying, has helped. And I know that for fellow teachers, just that giving ourselves the credit, that we're patting ourselves on the back, saying we're here, that has helped us through this process.
Yeah, I imagine that has been the case for all of you, right? That students have thought, gosh, even if they haven't been able to verbalize it, their families so appreciative of that constant of their educators in a time where so much feels like it's changing. And Maritza, I know that I've heard from families in the Child Parent Academy them say, gosh, I didn't think that the program would continue amidst the pandemic, and then you showed up, right? And so that just showing up, say, just matters so much. Those relationships, being able to continue. Great. Anajah or Sonya, what do you think that teachers need now?
As a teacher, teachers, we have many roles. Like today, you're a boo-boo, kids are the next day, you are making sure that their blankets are over, their shoulders to make sure that they are warm. We wear so many hats, and sometimes we are really hard on ourselves and saying, hey, we're not doing this, but we're not doing that. This is not the way as planned. You know, like the lesson that we spent 5 hours planning, it's not going the way that it should be. I think during this time, I try to tell myself that, you know, when we think about teaching children as a whole and talk a lot more about SEL, what does it look like for me, right? As a human being, as a teacher, what does it mean for me to be taking care of myself on top of that? So I think building community, it takes a village to raise a child. It is so true. So when times are hard, maybe lean on the parents to communicate with them, lean on the leaders, you know, of a school to communicate our needs, and having those support would be really helpful.
Yes, absolutely. I was like, just cheering you on as you say all of that, right? It's not just a village to raise a child, right? But also to support the people who are doing that work, and that importance of that community. Yeah, and Anajah, what would you add to all the beautiful, amazing insights that have been shared?
I think it's fitting and it's right that I go last, because I think that that's connected to my answer. I would say, frankly, I'm concerned about our teachers, and at a systems level, it's something that we need to be paying attention to, the health of our teachers right now, and the like broader trends we're seeing around stress, burnout, and overwhelm. But what I will say is, as we stepped into the pandemic, we've seen our teachers step into a different type of leadership and being able to help us to shape the direction. And I think that the answer here isn't going to be an answer I come up with, but it will require really deep listening of our teachers and a willingness to do things fundamentally differently. I think it'll be different than, bringing in a therapist or some like some of the leaves on the trees. I think there's some fundamental shifts, and I think the answers will live with the Rachel and the Sonya and the Maritza. And I think that deep listening, empowering our teachers to help shape the way is the direction. So I'd say listen to them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that, gosh, from your vantage point, right? You're working with novice teachers, right, at Teach for America. And it makes me think of how the challenges could be even more exacerbated when you're thinking about a first-year teacher who's coming in and saying, wow, this is the scope, right? This is the scope of my role. But how important it is for us to not underestimate the insights of a first year, a novice teacher, or a parent, a caregiver on expressing what they need. And I think that's something that we've tried to really lean into at VOCEL, is saying, maybe the Child Parent Academy was like this in the past, or, maybe a teacher fellowship would have looked like this 5 years ago, but what do people need now? And what are we hearing? So I'm really glad that you shared that around listening. We have, let's see, just about a couple minutes left. If there's anyone in the chat who has any questions for the panelists, feel free to add those in. Otherwise, I'm going to ask one more question to you all, which would be, if you had just kind of the opportunity to think about what, a school experience, classroom, would look like for your students, what would kind of be your hope for what it would look like in the future? And I know someone mentioned that it may have been Anajah, kind of seeing like what will we keep from this, kind of what will transcend, right, the pandemic in terms of the focus on social emotional learning or whatnot. I'm curious, what would be your hope for what continues that we've maybe found through the pandemic? And that can go to anyone, anyone who has a thought on that. I know it's a deep question, so feel free to take a moment to think.
I can jump in. I think one thing that I hope to see going forward is oftentimes in early childhood, people feel a pressure to make a choice between academics and social emotional learning, or academics and play-based learning. And one thing that I hope that we take from all of the informal learning that happened during the pandemic and all of the formal learning is that that's actually a false choice, and that we can actually choose social emotional learning, play-based learning, and academics all at the same time. And that we can, when we prioritize all of them, we see really strong holistic child growth and transformation. And that's what's really possible for early childhood.
Great.
I think I would like to continue to see the power of the community, like like we're saying, that families gather together even virtually and build that community for their children, to be engaging with other families, to show them that power of community and bringing each other together is going to help the child. So I hope that that's something that we can continue.
Absolutely. Maybe those community groups will go back in person, but still that sense of community. Yeah. Sonya or Anajah, any thoughts that you have on what you hope to see continue?
Yeah, as we're during this pandemic, we really push the use of technology and the access to technology. And I really hope that even after the pandemic, students can still and continue to have access to technology, because that really supported many of the learnings.
Yes, I heard someone recently talking about how digital access needs to be a right, not a privilege, and with how much is only accessible that way these days. And I think about that, right? How there's been this focus on making sure more people have internet access and devices, and probably hasn't been nearly enough, but that priority really continuing. I appreciate you bringing that up, Sonya.
I would double click everything I heard you say. And I've obviously really deeply invested in the full continuum, right? What parents start at home, what you all pick up, and the way that translates throughout a child's educational career. And so I hope that where you all excel, right? Social emotional learning, the academics, the parental involvement, that we saw everyone have to really step into a new version of that. We, like the rest of us, rise to meet the occasion and meet the standard that you all set in early childhood. And so really that we meet you there.
Absolutely. And that collaboration and teamwork is something that, that cross-grade collaboration and the continuum is something that is actually appropriate, Anajah, that you finished us off with that, because that is a core piece of our Early Educators for Thriving Children Fellowship that's just launching. We actually, we were thinking about, gosh, should this be for pre-K teachers? And we decided, let's do it pre-K and kindergarten teachers together this year. Next year, let's add in first grade teachers. There's such an importance around that vertical alignment, so much we can learn from each other, that I think that's something that we hope to incorporate in our programs at VOCEL and see across the board in the education field. So with that, I want to thank all of you so much for participating tonight. I know that you're busy and this is carving out time. And I think you all really exemplify the power of community in so many ways. So thank you, Maritza, Sonya, Rachel, and Anajah for being here with us tonight. And as I mentioned at the top of our time together, let me get this slide back up really quickly. There we go. So VOCEL works not only with teachers, but also with school leaders and with parents. And we're celebrating all of those people, those extraordinary adults in that ecosystem, through our Power of Community campaign. So we started last week with our Power of Parents program, which is now available on our YouTube channel. And thanks to presenting sponsors IMC of that program. And then we'll be capping off the campaign next week with our Power of School Leaders presentation. And that's on October 21st. So just 1 week from today. And thanks to presenting sponsors Lindy Hirschzone and Chris Coatsey. So my colleague Anais is going to share the registration link in the chat. We'd love to have you there with us. We have another powerful panel of incredible educators and experts, just like we had tonight, teed up for you all for next Thursday. So we'd love to have you join us. To finish us out for tonight, I think it's important that you know at VOCEL, our mission is to help ensure every child has the foundation to learn, grow, and lead. So over the next 3 years, we're going to be growing all of our programs so that we can impact nearly 2,500 children by 2024. And that's compared to less than 400 children a year ago. But that growth is only possible because of the VOCEL village of partners, supporters, who are really a critical element of that ecosystem of extraordinary adults that are helping young children thrive in Chicago. And I know that many of you on this call tonight who are listening in are some of those partners and supporters. So thank you so much to you. And this campaign has already been really successful. We've raised more than $210,000 through our Power of Community campaign. So we need you to help us reach our goal of $250,000 for this campaign to support the growth of those programs and reaching more children and families and educators. So you can make a gift via the link in the chat that Anais is going to share. And again, I just want to emphasize, we really can't do this work without you or without all of our partners. So thank you so much. An enormous thank you again also to our sponsors, including our Power of Community presenting sponsors, Lindy and Mike Kaiser, and our Power of Teachers presenting sponsors, Mary and Paul Finnegan. And also to all of you for joining tonight and spending some of your evening with us. We're going to leave the webinar open for a few minutes. So if you have any questions or comments, you can pop those into the chat box. And I'm really proud to have you as part of our community. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.